Hey again, everyone. I hope you're having a good start to your weekend. It's a Friday night going into Saturday morning, just a few minutes before midnight Eastern time. Of course, this is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. And we are getting you set for week 3, which kicks off in just about 12 hours. And before the games kick off at noon, we'll be right back here at 10 o'clock Eastern time in the morning with our big kickoff show that we've done the first 2 weeks of the season, and we will carry into week 3, a live stream at 10 a.m. Eastern time to talk college football from 10 to just about all the way up until the noon kickoffs. Want to let you know that we've previewed a number of games this week, all the big games. Tried to get to all the major tilts. Ohio State, TCU, 3 different previews on that. And TCU fans, do not hold it against me. I did my best to bring on a TCU rep, a TCU guest. I contacted a number of TCU media, was not able to flag anyone down or have anyone respond. So I attempted to bring the TCU perspective to the big matchup in Dallas against the Buckeyes. So we do have Ohio State TCU previews. We've got previews of USC and Texas, Washington, Utah, Miami, Toledo, Florida State, Syracuse, Arizona State, San Diego State, Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU, Auburn. Of course, that's the huge one in the SEC, and Nebraska as they prepare for Troy. All right. I want to invite you to look down in the description section, and you will see 3 links from Amazon. And what those are simply a way to get onto Amazon. So most people, tons of people, obviously, use Amazon on a regular basis. So if you shop on Amazon, do us here at Mark Rogers TV a enormous, huge favor. Shop on Amazon. Buy, of course, whatever you want. It doesn't matter to me what you buy. Just use those links. Just grab one of those links. They're posted underneath all the videos on Mark Rogers TV. Go to the description section of any of them, pull any one of those 3 Amazon links, and just enter Amazon using one of those links, and that will help out the channel. All right. Also, we've got a newsletter. You guys know about this, and if you haven't subscribed, that's fine. I won't hold it against you. You're just missing out. Facts, trends, stats you won't find anywhere else. Also, perspective from me on college football, of course, and a channel update, as I have attempted and will even more so in the future to bring you guys into the loop of my vision, my plan, what I have in store in the future, and to gain your insight and suggestions and your preferences on what you would like to see here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. If you or anyone you know would rather hear the audio, not have to look at me and other people, not have to look at us, but use the audio because you're running errands or working out or traveling, then go to Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, or Stitcher and just search Mark Rogers TV. And we've not been able to get all the video content moved over to the audio platforms, and it posts there later. So you still get the best content, the most content, and the most immediate content right here on the video on YouTube. But just in case, if you want to listen to the audio podcast, it is my aim and goal to do a better job of making sure that everything gets duplicated from video to the audio podcast as we build that out as well. All right. So we will open up the phones in just a second. First, I want to give my predictions for a week 3. And it might be better if I don't give my predictions. Man, I can't be thrown off by one bad week. So I let a lot of you know who have yet to see my predictions season to season. A lot of you people have jumped on board in the off season, not during the 2017 season or before that I make my weekly predictions. I'm not a pro. I love doing it. I've been pretty successful in the past. Last year was a pretty typical year at 155 and 114 against the spread. 155 correct, 114 wrong. That's 57.6% against the spread. It's pretty good. It's not great. There will be people out there that will do better. They're typically professionals. I just go down the schedule and select. But last week was maybe the worst week I've ever had in doing this against the spread. 6-13 after an excellent week 1 at 12-7. So not a big deal. I'm typically in this range of 18-20 against the spread through 2 weeks. I typically get better as the season goes. So again, if you want to get primed for tomorrow's games, we've got USC, Texas, Ohio State, TCU, Washington, Stanford, Miami, Toledo, Florida State, Syracuse, Arizona State, San Diego State, Ole Miss, and Alabama, LSU, Auburn, and Nebraska previews for Saturday. Get your email to MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Just send it right there, and I'll get you the newsletter out. Week 3's on Monday. If you request the first 2 weeks, I'll get those out to you as well. 860-325-3687. And here come the predictions. Hopefully we've got some folks on the chat. Here we go with the picks. Undaunted, unwavered, my confidence not shaken. Here come the predictions. But before I give my predictions, you guys take this in for a second. And we've got a few people in the live chat. Take this in for a second. That in the first 2 weeks of the season, I just looked at the games, and there were 19 games that I predicted against the spread. So what I do is I take the top 25 and I pick all those games. And then if there are some interesting games, like in last week, there were some games outside the top 25 that I found interesting, like Kentucky and Florida. There might have been a few other ones somewhere. Iowa State was another one. There were several outside the top 25 games that I found intriguing. The same thing in week 1. So I'll pick those as well. But basically the top 25 and a few other games, and those are the games I select. So there were 19 of those in the first week and 19 in week 2, and you have to throw out the powerhouse teams that play the FCS games because there's no line. So, for example, in week 1, I picked 23 games straight up, but only 19 against the spread because of 4 games not having any line because they were expected blowouts of mammoth proportion. So here's my stat for you. In the first 2 weeks of the season, 19 games against the spread in week 1. The underdog, got a call coming in. The underdog won straight up 5 times. In week 2, the underdog won straight up 5 times, and I'll finish my point in just a second. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, it's George, Mark.
Hey, George. What's going on?
I was wondering, do you have any idea what the point spread is on the Florida-Colorado State game?
I saw that. Give me just a second to pull it up. I didn't pick that game. I will pull it up in just a second. So I was given this stat just a second ago, George, because you like to pick the games. So in the first 2 weeks of the season, each week there was 19 games that I picked against the spread. They were basically top 25 games. 5 times out of the 19 each week, the underdog won straight out. Okay. 5 out of 19 times. That seems pretty reasonable. Wow. There was one time each week that a double-digit underdog, and I hate to bring this up because week 2 was your Florida Gators, that a double-digit underdog pulled off the upset. It was Maryland over Texas as a 13-point dog in week 1. It was Kentucky as a 2-touchdown dog last week against Florida. It's happened twice this year. Wow. That's just my fun fact for the night. As I was looking through my picks for the first 2 weeks.
Implications.
All right, we got. So
does that mean Florida might get to win once, or what?
Might get to win once.
Well, as the underdog, I mean, what would be one of those 2-point spreads and pull it off?
Well, this is what it says to me. It says to me if I'm picking the games, like and I pick about
Georgia when we're
okay
20-point underdogs.
Well, it's kind of looking that way right now. Let's see. Florida hosting Colorado State. It's got to be right here. Do we know what time that game is?
I'm going to guess Florida by 11.
Okay, I think you're pretty close. You are really no. Opened at 19.5. It's up to 20.5.
Really?
Yeah. So I've got all the
Wow.
major Vegas sports books right here. I've got like 8 of them, and they all say 19.5.
Hey,
Or up to 20.5.
When I gamble, first of all, sometimes from observing college football, sometimes it's just what's that called? Intuition.
There's a little bit of that. The women are supposed to have that more than us.
Well, whatever. There's certain games when you just know, and once they pass you by a few times, you wish you would have bet that game.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. That hit me a few times the last 2 weeks. Yeah.
Right. But other than that, there's this thing called dice setting. You know what dice setting is when you go to a casino? How you put the dice together before you roll them?
Yes.
And you roll them like they're a car axle tumbling forward.
Yep.
Yeah. If I was going to gamble, I like to keep the shit in my power. And if they're cheating, I can tell they're cheating. You know what I mean? Like shit's not running true to form. So, yeah, college football, betting on that, oh my God. Yeah.
What is the strategy there? If you line up the dice and roll them like that, like an axle?
I'll send you a video. I'll post a video on one of your things just showing you some old timer. You always put it on the axis. If you want to roll a 6, you put a 4 and a 2 or a 5 and 1 on the middle. Like click them together, like in the middle, like you're holding them together. The 5 and a 1, the 4 and a 2. You want a 6. And you try to roll them like they're a car axle. You toss them gently so they barely land before they hit the end of the table, and they hit the wall once and fall dead. And it'll be a 6,
Interesting.
Yeah, casinos will fuck with you if they realize what you're doing. You got to be subtle about it. You need to be a professional and just grab those dice and somehow manipulate them in that shape you want, because some guys just stand there and stare at the dice and do it obviously, and they'll shut you down if they know what you're doing. Oh, yeah.
You can't even count cards, which I think is just a skill. If you're that smart to count cards, then what's the...
I've been kicked out of casinos twice for counting cards, Mark. And
yeah.
Listen, tell me this isn't roll on the floor laughing funny shit. I've never counted cards in my life. They won't even let you win, honestly. Like just have a lucky day. I mean, they told me to leave, and they were rude about it. And I wasn't counting cards. Before I walk into the casino, I tell my brain, as I'm walking in, I say to myself, all right, brain, I know you're a McRae supercomputer. I know you keep track of the 6 decks I jokingly say that to myself, yeah. And then I sit there and guess. And I go, in my head, I go 3, 2, king, 6, 5. I watch the cards, and I guess. And they kicked me out twice, just doing it without even counting. Because it's a random event, and you can kind of get a feel for the pattern. And thank God for college football. What would we do?
What would we do?
What would we do? You and Uncle Lou, there's just, I hope you guys take over the internet.
Oh, I hope so, too. I'm right there with you. I'll share the internet with Uncle Lou. He's a good guy.
That's a valid niche. That's a valid niche with shitloads of money-making opportunities. I mean, there's all kind of angles for sponsorships, just anything and everything. Just like everybody copy each other,
I had somebody contact me just 3 or 4 days ago. I haven't looked into their little platform there, but they were offering possible sponsorships. So we'll see what that's all about.
Yeah, but Uncle Lou once described you as vanilla, and it wasn't in a demeaning way. It was in a kind way. So you need your second channel, rude Mark Rogers, where you just like start out with loud Metallica or some other biker bar music.
Well, it's funny, George, because I had this conversation with somebody today because, okay, so my approach is, of course, I'm a college football fan. I wouldn't be doing this an insane amount of time if I didn't love college football. If you guys hear me just spew on facts and stats and memories of games and all that, you guys know that I absorb this stuff and I've been watching it for years and I love college football. I will sit and watch it from noon tomorrow until 2 o'clock in the morning. So I love college football. So but I'm trying to cut it straight, so I'm not going to come on here with my Ohio State garb on and go nuts.
It's a difficult situation. Some universities should hire you a lot of money to just be a homer for them because you're kind of independent right now. You say you're an Ohio State fan, but you don't side with them or favor them.
I try not to.
Necessarily.
I try not to. I did not pick them to win the national championship. I did not say that they should make the playoff 2 years ago. I said that Penn State should have gone because that's what I believed.
Yeah. How big's your stadium? 100,000 fans or what?
111.
111. So listen, your football program will survive this experiment that you just underwent. It's horrible. I'm sorry. I'm so glad Urban Meyer's got out of Florida before it was too late. I have a feeling there was some crazy shit. Imagine, yeah.
Hey George, do your best
I'm glad there was no deep throat in Florida.
George,
we had Aaron Hernandez. He was probably murdering people on weekends or something.
Okay, George, myself and other people would like you to clean up the language, please.
Okay.
As best you can. If you let one or two slip, obviously I've not
I don't even know I'm
made a
doing
mistake
it.
there.
I'm a sailor. I belong on a slave ship. Yeah.
So the thing with Ohio State is what's going to be interesting is I think they're fine during the season, but once they get back on the recruiting trail, we'll see if this has had an impact.
I think sometimes the political correctness has something to do with it. It seems to come across like they had Hurricane Katrina and then New Orleans won the next 3 Super Bowls, you know, and then 9/11 happened and Boston won the next 3 Super Bowls. And so I think what happened is somehow going to maybe keep them out of the playoffs, you know, like just lose one game, you know, so they can disavow you, you know, not you, but them.
Sure. We'll see. We'll see if that happens. But I'm just talking about.
Don't lose one game. That's all I can say. Don't lose.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a tall tale in that conference.
See the handwriting on the wall. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want it brought up in discussions. I bet Ohio State told Urban Meyer to lose a game. They don't want to be on TV this year.
Well, maybe certain people within the administration, from the top don't.
This would be a good game to lose. If you're going to lose one, the first game back, blah, blah, blah. We can write a storyline on that. But, you know, they were out of sync. So I was going to put my money. What's the spread on that game? TCU? Is it TCU?
It's too high. Ohio State's a 13-point favorite.
Yeah, see, there you go. That's free money, right? Or is Ohio State going to come out like a lion and win by 45 points? I don't know.
That might be a little bit high, but I think they're going to win. I'm going to give my pick here in a minute, but I think they're going to win the game.
All right. I'll let you go and listen to your pick.
All right, George. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, man.
You have a good one.
If you ever need any heads-up inside information on conspiracy theories, call me on the side.
Well, it sounds like you've got a ton of them.
I'm all over it. I change daily. You know, you got to keep updated.
It doesn't sound like we should be watching sports if it's all fixed.
No. College football is the most purest form of art left on earth. Leave those guys alone. They're young. They're innocent. They have no idea what they're involved in yet. It's cool. I love it.
Yeah, enjoy the games tomorrow.
By the time you get to the NFL, it's all ruined. You know, you're making secret closure statements on contracts. You know, it's like, yeah, it's entertainment at the NFL level. In college, the kids are still serious.
All right, George.
It's not entertainment. College isn't entertainment. College is sports. That's all we have.
Well, the NBA, I think, is the highest form of the entertainment, sports becoming entertainment. Now, that's entertainment.
I agree. Even the players admit that. They openly talk about it, don't they?
Oh, I'm sure some have. I'm sure some have. All right, George, you have yourself a good weekend, and we'll be back tomorrow. So if you've got time, stop by.
Mark Rogers, the voice of college football. That's what I say.
I can't end it any better. Thanks, George.
I can't believe you don't have 4 million viewers and 110,000 hits on every video. It's crazy.
Well, it's about analytics is part of it, so we'll work on that.
Hire somebody, man. They can fix that shit in one day. It's underhanded, but who cares?
That's what I've heard. I've had a couple people approach me.
I used to know a guy that could do it, Mark.
I've had a couple people approach me
on the internet every day.
Yeah, I've had a couple people approach me and tell me that they could get me views and subscribers in a hurry.
It sounds perfectly legal to me.
Okay. All right, George.
I mean, if it's not against the federal law, what the fuck? Federal law rules. Check it out.
All right, George. Have a good one, man.
Later.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
We'll talk to you tomorrow. All right, we got George on the line with always an interesting perspective. George would be the one that at times I don't know how to respond. So we just allow him to make his take and let it go from there. All right, but George has been a beyond faithful. George sometimes comments to videos just to support. He's really got nothing to say. Well, he's always got something to say, but he will comment to videos just to give the support, just to ring up another comment or 2 or 3 or 15. So I appreciate that. I'm going to check out the chat, see who's online, say hi to everyone. Hope you guys are doing well tonight. I was not going to do this, but I wanted to hear from you guys. I wanted to talk to you guys, and I also wanted to give my picks. I was just going to cut a video, record it, send it, post it, but I thought, hey, I'll just do a live stream. All right. Bash Gaming on the line. Yeah, it's a late one. Prince, we talked to Prince for the first time the other night. Got a chance to talk to him. ST6 Nation. Have yet to see you on the line. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV, NCIS Fanatic 21. Good to see you. George, of course, D. Rev Lee, first time I've seen you on the chat. So anybody who's on the chat for the first time, if you want, let us know who you root for and how long you've been watching. Chris Evans, Miami, please don't lose in Toledo. Maybe. If that were a night game, I would feel a little bit better about pulling the trigger on the big upset. AC Outlaw, I believe this is the first time at Mark Rogers TV, at least you joining the chat. So welcome. Josh Forrest. Josh, I believe we've come across your name at times. Buckeye State Sports, it's good to see you. Buckeye State Sports with a post on Twitter that was sent to me today or yesterday showing the bracket after Ohio State in 2014 was chosen over TCU and Baylor. I got to say, I didn't exactly know what the point was except to say, let it go. TCU, let it go. There will be a game tomorrow night. Chris Harris, good to see you. Jarrett Stidham at home, 76% completion rate, 12 TDs, 3 interceptions, beat Georgia and Bama. Volunteer Road Show's back. Good to see you guys. NCIS Fanatic 21. If you have not seen his prediction, you have not been paying attention. He has stated it all week. NCIS Fanatic 21 going with the Buckeyes 45-24. So the Buckeyes also cover. Prince, I think the spread is 9.5. Wouldn't bet that unless it moves to 10. Must be talking about Miami Toledo. The last I saw was at 10.5. We've got a call coming in. All right, here we go.
The call will start at the beep.
Mark Rogers TV, voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, it's Bash. What's up?
What's going on, man?
Not much. Just a little bit of a late night. Got home from some high school football and just chilling out.
Good game.
Preparing kind of for the day tomorrow.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit of Ohio State TCU. Kind of a little bit of the elephant in the room. You've kind of touched on other games and what you feel about like Utah and Washington. But definitely the big one, Ohio State TCU. I don't know if you want to make a pick now, but when are you making that pick?
My predictions are right there. I'm about to run them all down. So I'll just spit this one out. Buckeyes win. TCU covers 13. Ohio State wins 38-28.
Okay. I got Ohio State 34-13 covering.
Okay.
The reason I say this, I think this one's a close one at halftime.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a defensive type game, and we're going to go into halftime thinking, though, that Ohio State's going to be a better team. I think Ohio State's going to be able to move the ball, but TCU is going to be able to get off the field in the first half, and by the end, Ohio State's just going to, you know, their athletes and their just top-end skill will go ahead and overwhelm TCU in the second half. I'm thinking somewhere along the lines of 13-10 at halftime, 7-10, something like that. I think Haskins is going to have a big second half, and I think TCU will struggle to stay in the ball game because I don't think Sean Robinson will be able to throw the ball downfield well enough. Your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple things came to mind. I don't know if you heard some of the previous segments. So we've done 3 Ohio State TCU segments, and I apologize to anyone. I think Zoom plays a big TCU supporter. I tried to get a TCU guest on, but nobody responded. So anyway, Ohio State 3, TCU nothing on the segments this week on Mark Rogers TV. My couple thoughts right there are that, number one, we saw Kellen Mond maybe just have a big game out of nowhere, and he'll go back to being a 51% passer next week or against the next decent opponent he faces. But for a second half against Clemson, he played out of his mind. I kind of liken Kellen Mond to Sean Robinson. Now, I'm not predicting that, but that's what he's got the ability to do. He's not shown that level of accuracy and consistency yet. He's only played 2 games, really, but they're similar quarterbacks. The other thought is I liken this situation from a talent perspective and from a speed and then also in the trenches play perspective to the 2 games against Oregon in the last 10 years at the Rose Bowl in the national championship game, in which people thought that Oregon, I heard it over and over and over and over from people, that Oregon was too fast, played at too high of a tempo, too quick in space, and Ohio State was an underdog in both games by 5 to 7 points in both games.
For sure.
And I always thought, okay, let's look at these 2 rosters and project the NFL players. And if we would take these 2 rosters 3 years from now and see who's playing in the NFL, Ohio State's going to have 3 times as many NFL players. Now, that doesn't always equal a victory, as Iowa taught us last year, but
I was about to say that.
It does most of the time. So I'm right there with you. 34-13 is feasible.
I will also say this. I wouldn't be too surprised if TCU even won the game. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if they covered. I just don't really see it happening. I don't think Sean Robinson is going to have that great success, considering Texas A&M's offensive line is a lot better than TCU's, and their receivers are, you know, Texas A&M's are a lot bigger, and they're able to come down with the ball a lot more than TCU's wide receivers.
Good point.
And I just, you know, a lot of, like, Kellen Mond played really good, but a lot of times you had mainly Rodgers bailing him out in that ball game against Clemson, kind of coming up with big plays, big catches. Like, you had that last touchdown that that set up the 2-point conversion to tie. That one could have easily been picked off. You had another touchdown where it was kind of shades of that Josh Rosen play against Texas A&M, where, you know, he's scrambling out of the pocket and just heaves it up there, and the receiver comes up running from sideline, doesn't go out of bounds, but run from sideline kind of in the middle to the ball and just dives and catches it, kind of thing. You know what I'm talking about?
I absolutely do. I watched almost the entire game.
That situation.
So
also had that situation. I don't know if Robinson can do that. I really like Darius Anderson, but I don't know how well he's going to do in the run game. But I guess we'll see. Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised by any outcome whatsoever in this game, except for TCU blowing out Ohio State, which I think isn't really that probable. Okay, so the second thing I was going to talk about, another game, Oklahoma State, Boise State. I'm not going to really say too much about this. I mean, I think Boise State should win, and they should win by a couple scores. But this game is probably, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Brian Harsin because he is going to have this big game against a Power 5 team that Chris Peterson could honestly take this team that they have now and probably blow them out, or at least win by 3-4 scores, you know, like 17, 24 points. They could win pretty handily, lopsided kind of victory. Boise State could under Chris Peterson. So this is kind of a testament to Brian Harsin and how well he can get this team prepared, because Harsin, he's been good at Boise State, not Chris Peterson good. He hasn't had the undefeated seasons. The Mountain West champion. He made the New Year's Six one time, I believe, which was the first year of the New Year's Six, and that was kind of you know, a down year for all Group of Five. So this is a big time moment for Brian Harsin. If he wins this game, watch out for Boise State. I'm not necessarily going to say, because we saw with UCF last year, that they're going to be in the playoff, but if that team's undefeated, I'm just going to say it right here. Boise State should definitely be considered for the playoff, considering their brand, number one, will help them. And number two, they do have somewhat of a tougher schedule than UCF had last year. I wouldn't necessarily call it at the top, like they had Memphis twice last year. But you talk about they have Oklahoma State on their schedule. They got Wyoming, which is a really solid team, solid defense. They have Utah State in their division, which is looking really good right now. They just won by 61 points. It's Tennessee Tech, but they just won by 61 points. Offensive explosion last night on Facebook Live. And they have to go through Fresno State, who isn't too shabby either. They return Marcus McMarion. And lastly, possibly a matchup in the conference championship, San Diego State. So it's not necessarily at the highest level at the top, but I think Boise State's schedule is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Just kind of like middle heavy. It's not necessarily great teams, but they're going to get the best punches from teams that aren't really too bad.
So it's a deep schedule.
Hawaii also looks good.
It's the opposite of a BYU schedule. BYU plays the oddest schedule in the country every year because they play about 4 really strong opponents. They play Wisconsin. They've played Michigan State in recent years. They'll play Washington like they do in a week. They'll play like 4 or 5 really tough games, but then they're playing like Wagner at the end of the year, and they play some really awful teams. So you're saying that Boise's playing a deep schedule against a lot of like top 50 type teams that are good teams, but they're not playing anybody great. And Oklahoma State's not supposed to be on its game this year as a program. It would have been a more meaningful game last year, the way Oklahoma State was touted preseason.
Oh, I would have loved to see if you had Rudolph and Washington on this team. I would love to see that. Boise State this year versus Oklahoma State with Rudolph and Washington. That would be a fun game to watch for sure. I think that one would go down to the wire. So I really like this Boise State team, though.
Yeah, I do too. I named them as one of my 10 dark horses at the beginning of the year when I cut a video on dark horses, and I pegged this game as a threshold type game, even though Oklahoma State is not currently in the top 25, or did they just barely get into the top 25 possibly?
Top 25.
Yeah, so they're not in my top 25, but they've dipped into the top 25 for no apparent reason. They haven't beaten anyone. But anyway, regardless, yeah, it's a top 25 game, and it's on the road, and we've seen Boise State do this in the past. We had the rivals guy on from Washington, and we talked a lot about Chris Peterson, and I was making the same point that you were just a second ago concerning this program being built by the likes of Houston Nutt, but it reaching its peak by far under Chris Peterson, and it's leveled off to become a top 25 or 30 program to where Peterson had it fringe top 10 over and over and over and over. And yeah, this is a big game for Boise State to not have another season of 10-2, great season, pat on the back, points settable, there you go. But for them to break through and make it really interesting, maybe with an undefeated November, and to see if they can push and make it difficult on the college football playoff selection committee. I absolutely agree.
I hate what the committee did to UCF last year. They were an undefeated team. The fact that they were struggling to even put them in the top 10 bothered me. I think they should have at least been considered, and I would be a little less mad with that decision. I don't know. What did you think about that? I never really You think the committee got it right last year? Can't remember what your stance was because I've heard many different people's stances on that. I mostly side with Joel Klatt. You know, I'm sure you know who he is.
Oh yeah, I like Joel Klatt.
Which, yeah, I like Joel Klatt too. I mean, he's consistent, very good analyst. Definitely someone who, you know, if he says something wrong, he would definitely say, "Wow, okay, I was wrong. Let's say why I was wrong." But anyway, yeah, I sided with him about last year.
Well, here's my
getting off on a tangent.
Here's my take, Bash, because you probably weren't around at the time, but I was on a rampage for about 2 weeks on this, and people didn't quite understand, like they don't quite understand my approach to a top 25. So I, once the playoffs started, selected Alabama to beat Clemson and then to beat Georgia. So I obviously believed in Alabama's quality of play and quality of roster. I believed once they got to the playoff, they were the best team and were going to win the national championship. But that has to be separated from who earned the position, who earned the spot. So for me, there's a reason we have conferences. And unfortunately, we've got an idiotic system trying to cram 5 conferences into 4 slots, which is, of course, impossible. Therefore, you have to determine who are the 4 best conference champions, in my opinion. That's how I would approach it. Therefore, I was an Ohio State selector over Alabama. And of course, people went crazy about Alabama's better than Ohio State. And I kept telling them, I am not telling you that Alabama's not better than Ohio State. I'm telling you that Ohio State earned it because they won a conference championship. But even beyond that, they had a better resume than Alabama did. Now, of course, as you well know, the game that was reiterated more than any other score in America, the one you could be a fringe college football fan, and by the end of the college football playoff debate, everybody knew 55-24. And I get it. That was a horrendous performance by Ohio State on the road. I get it. But let's also understand, if we're going to penalize for bad losses, whether they beat a bad teams or by bad scores, in this case, it was against a decent team, but a horrible score, then we also need a reward for wins. And Alabama at that point had only beaten Mississippi State and LSU, who were ranked roughly in the top 15 in the country. Ohio State had beaten Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan State. Who am I missing? Penn State. Penn State, Michigan State, Wisconsin.
Ohio, or Wisconsin, Penn State, Michigan State in the top 25.
Yeah,
Michigan wasn't there.
So basically, Ohio State. I'm just saying, Ohio State had 2 wins against the top 8. They had 3 against the top 15. And if you take so Alabama escaped against Mississippi State in the last minute, and they beat LSU despite being outgained in an ugly game. Ohio State, if you're going to take the negative of the blowout loss against an okay Iowa team, then what I didn't hear was, let's give Ohio State credit for completely annihilating a top 15 team in Michigan State 48-3. I never heard that score referenced. That
never.
So let's credit as much as we penalize. That game was the mere opposite of the Iowa game. It's a top 15 team, and you're destroying them, something that Alabama didn't do against anyone.
And another thing I'll say about that is the College Football Playoff Committee shows a huge inconsistency, not just through the years, but even in that same year, because guess who was ranked number 1? Clemson. Out of the top 3, Clemson had the worst loss. It was on the road. It was a Friday night. Kelly Bryant went down. But Kelly Bryant, as shown, Alabama kind of exposed that. Kelly Bryant didn't really make that game Syracuse competitive. I mean, wasn't Syracuse up when Kelly Bryant went down? And
Yes.
It was a 4-8 Syracuse team versus Oklahoma, who lost by 7 points to a good Iowa State team. Not great. It's kind of like what you touched on, but they proved in their bowl game that they're pretty good. They beat a solid Memphis team, which shouldn't be a factor at that time, by the way. But they had a good win against Iowa State. I believe they were number 2, right?
Iowa State beat TCU as well.
Yeah, Iowa State did beat TCU, but Oklahoma was number 2, right?
When they lost?
No, in the playoffs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they had the home uniforms on at the Rose Bowl. Yes, they were number 2.
Okay. So they were number 2. So they got a better argument than Clemson. And you also got to factor in they beat TCU twice. They beat Ohio State down on the road in the Horseshoe.
Sure.
And Clemson really didn't have that on their resume at all, really.
No.
And then you also got Georgia, whose only loss, and I think they should have been number 1 just based on merit and resume. Their only loss was to Auburn on the road in Jordan-Hare. Granted, it was ugly, but they came back a couple weeks later and beat Auburn in the SEC championship. So they amended their own loss. So yeah, it goes bad on your record, but it somewhat negates that loss, and that's why Georgia and Alabama should have played in the semifinal, and we would have had an Alabama-Oklahoma, more than likely, Alabama-Oklahoma championship. I feel like Oklahoma would have beat Clemson at least by 10 points. And if we had an Alabama-Oklahoma championship, I'm not necessarily saying Oklahoma's a better team, but then maybe they can match up better against Alabama than Georgia would have offensively with the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and the balance that they had with the pass game and the run game late in the season with Rodney Anderson. And we could be talking that Oklahoma national championship champions instead of Oklahoma getting screwed and having to play against probably what was maybe the better team in the playoff, because I don't necessarily know, because Georgia, that game was a toss-up, but Georgia did control a lot of that game against Alabama. So they got punished in a sense for what? I mean, Clemson did lose, like I said, to Syracuse, which was 4-8, and that was a worse loss. And you're going to leave Ohio State out because they had a bad loss, yet your number 1 team gets ranked above 2 other teams that had a great resume, and their losses weren't nearly as bad. It's just the inconsistency that I have a problem with the committee. I also got a problem with the committee that I believe half the committee has SEC, or not SEC, Southeastern regional ties. That's an issue. So I'm just going on a tangent about my problems there. And yeah, that's basically it.
Well, my other take on the committee, and I think that they've had an impossible task starting with year 1, but that's the deal, 4 spots. But my take is that people, I love that time of year when the championship games have been played, and for a few days, people are just arguing, just select the 4 best teams, select the 4 best teams. Well, I'm not God. I'm not omniscient. No one is. So if God came down in his omniscience and was able to say, those are the 4 best teams, I would say, absolutely. God just said, those are the 4 best teams. We know they're the 4 best teams, but none of us know who the 4 best teams are. Therefore, we have to select the 4 best resumes, 4 best track records. And if the committee was so smart and they could select the best team, which that's their claim, that's their mission, they say, is to select the 4 best teams. Well, if they were in fact capable of doing that, then they would rank the best team number 1. And in 4 years, they've never ranked the national champion number 1. Not once. Yeah. So if they're so smart, they would rank the team that was the best number 1, and they would go on and win the national title. But that's never happened.
And you cannot base a national championship 4-team playoff off of pure subjectivity. What did Bama have going for them against Ohio State, really, if we're talking about the resume part of it? Ohio State had the Big Ten championship. Ohio State had the wins. I guess Alabama didn't have the ugly loss. They still lost by 2 scores against Auburn in their last game. Looked terrible in their last game offensively. And defensively, they played okay, but not necessarily world beaters in that game, so even though they were depleted at linebacker, I will say that.
It
But,
wasn't what
I mean-
Alabama did. It's what Ohio State failed to do. Alabama did not win that spot. Ohio State, in the eyes of the committee, lost that spot when they lost to Iowa in that fashion.
In the wise words of Joel Klatt, we were just comparing two average resumes. That's why the college football playoff should not expand.
Well, I would disagree with that, but I understand the point. I get the point. When you say average resumes, I'm not thinking Alabama and Ohio State are really that average in 2017.
Okay, I shouldn't say average necessarily. I mean, that's what he said. I was kind of quoting him. I wouldn't say average, but they weren't great by any stretch of the imagination. They weren't top 4 type resumes. Those were the 2 worst resumes considered for the college football playoff. Well, really, I consider UCF as someone who should have been considered. But either way, that was the worst resume outlook for that 4th spot we've had in the playoff era. And I will also say this. If we are talking auto bids with the playoff, if we're expanding it to 6 or 8, which that's not even on the table right now, it's not going to happen for a while. But if we're expanding to 6 to 8, I do not want auto bids, and because we can see possibly, let's say, it's something like a 2012 situation where Ohio State went undefeated and Penn State was second in the division, but both were sanctioned. I believe that was the leaders division at the time. I don't know the dumb names that the Big Ten had.
Sure.
So the 3rd place team was Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
They were a 7-5 football team, and they won the conference championship against Nebraska.
Yep.
And they got to the Rose Bowl auto bid. So we would have been talking 8-5 Wisconsin team, who was the 3rd best team in their division, as in the playoff if we had auto bids.
Well, Bash Gaming, you're bringing up a great point, but that's just an aberration off the map. There could certainly be put into play stipulations that if there was some type of probation situation and a team was not the best in its division, then the auto bid would be deferred and there would be a selection and the spot would be open. You could just write that type of language into the selection process.
Okay, so then let's talk about this situation.
Okay.
You got Stanford last year. Let's say they, because they lost by 1 possession against USC. Let's say that and Stanford would have won. They would have been a 10-3 champion. Not bad, but shouldn't really be considered for the playoff over Alabama, Ohio State. Well, Alabama specifically, and teams ahead of them. Like I could name Alabama, Auburn, Wisconsin, USC, UCF. I just named 5 teams who should be in, and there would be, I'm assuming, like a group of 5 and then 2 wild card spots. So you're leaving out teams who are clearly better. Well, then again, USC would have lost to Stanford, so I guess that's a little bit negated. But I just named here 4 teams that probably deserve to be in against Stanford a lot more. Or how about there was a year where you had the top 5 and 3, 4, 5, I believe, were TCU, Cincinnati, and Boise State. How does that work? Do you just throw in TCU, Boise State, and Cincinnati into the playoff?
That was a BCS formula.
I guess. I mean, there's no way of telling how that would have played out.
Bash Gaming, this is the big reason I'm a proponent for 8 teams. Okay, if you look at other sports like the NFL, Major League Baseball, etc., they have anywhere from 35 to 50% of the league makes the playoffs. Now, certainly I'm not proposing that because we would have 65 teams in a college football playoff. But consider this. There are 130 teams in FBS play. We only have 4 make the playoff. If we expanded that to 8, and I've argued this with most notably Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football, who's a very knowledgeable and respected college football guy, but he thinks that would just deplete the excellence of the field. But I argue with him that we still would only have 6% of college football in the field. Okay, that's my number 1 point. My second point is that you have to have a system that negates this crazy selection of leaving out conference champions. the conference champions need to all make the playoff. All the conferences need to be represented. Then you would have the opportunity for 2 wild cards and the group of 5 best team to make it. And you've got your 8 teams. Point number 3, he says to me often, nobody wants the 8th best team in the country to win a national championship. Okay. Number 1, the 8th best team in the country most likely would rarely win the national championship because they would have to beat
and if
3.
They were, real quick, if they would win the national championship, they clearly weren't the 8th best team.
Absolutely.
Go on.
Yes, you're playing right into my argument. Number 1, if we think they're the 8th best team, just like we thought other teams were the 4th best team and they still won the national championship. So, for example, I believe the first year in 2014, Michigan State was number 8 in the country at 11-2, 10-2, 11-2. Then they beat Baylor in the Cotton Bowl. So if Michigan State would have made the field, let's say, as a wild card, and they're number 8 in the country, for them to win the national title after playing in one of the best conferences in America and finishing in 2nd place, they would have to beat 3 of the 7 best teams in the country. Now, if that's not earning a national title, when you would have to beat number 1, as number 8, you would have to beat number 1, and then you would have to, if chalk prevailed elsewhere, you'd play number 2 next, and then you'd play, I guess, number 3. I don't know how the bracket would work out, but you would play the 2 best teams in the country, or the 2 considered best teams in the country, and 3 of the top 7. You would have to beat that gauntlet to win the national title. And if you didn't earn a national title after doing that, I don't know what is earning a championship.
But, okay, so wouldn't you think that would a little bit negate the regular season? I'll also say this, too. No? Okay. I'll get to that in just a second. I'll also say this, too. If you're comparing MLB, NFL, it's a set system. NFL, let's go ahead because that's a football comparison.
Yep.
There's 32 teams in the NFL. You have 16 games and you split into divisions. You win your division, you are in, but it's only 4 teams in that division. You won't necessarily play cupcakes. All the teams are professional teams. You know, even the Cleveland Browns last year, Alabama couldn't stack up against, and I don't care what anyone says, it's a professional football team. You know? So it's a little different when you talk about that and the system that they have. They got so many tiebreakers, and you play each team in your division twice, and that's not how college football works. You play 4 teams from the other division or the conference, the NFC and the AFC square off 4 times. Like one AFC team is going to play an NFC team 4 times on their schedule. They play 4 different opponents from another AFC division and throw in 2 wild card type games. Like, just an example, if the Steelers were to play the AFC South and the NFC West, they would have also added on the Patriots and the Chargers. Oh, wait, they're what? West. Okay. Yeah, Chargers. Let's go Chargers. Why not? So then you kind of have a system in play just set up throughout the. You don't have that in college football because not all resumes, not all schedules are even. That's clear. Now, if we went to 9 conference games across the schedule, which I am so, such an advocate for everyone going to 9 conference games, and you can, schedule whatever cupcakes you want. I just want 9 conference games and 1 Power 5 opponent, and you can schedule frickin' the Citadel, Mercer. I don't even care. As long as you play 10 Power 5 opponents, I'm good. But anyway, if we can keep it as equal as possible scheduling-wise, then I could see it as an 18 playoff with auto bids. But I'll also say this. If we're talking auto bids, we are talking about games not mattering, such as USC last year against Notre Dame. That game doesn't really matter, right? Because Notre Dame blew out USC. USC would get in because they won their conference. So it doesn't matter, even though that's an out-of-conference game. Or Ohio State getting beat by Oklahoma. Why does Ohio State need to schedule that, Doesn't matter. There's no reason to even risk having a loss. You could get a higher seed, and that if you don't schedule Oklahoma, all you need to do is just walk through your conference. Doesn't matter. How about Iowa a couple years ago? Remember when they went 12-0, was inches away from winning the Big Ten championship, and they would have gotten to the playoff? Do we really want that kind of awarded in an 8-team? Like, just if you have a weak conference schedule a week out of conference, and hey, you could possibly get a top 4 seed. You know, so that's kind of my mindset there. I like 4 teams. I just think there needs to be clarity in a 4-team playoff. I think there needs to be, you know, accuracy. I've been on the line for a long time, so I'll go ahead and get off your sin. I think there needs to be a set standard, and I think that standard isn't necessarily a conference championship, but I think that should be a huge factor. Definitely a tiebreaker. But you got to look at resume, conference championships. You can value how teams look, but that's only if both teams have a really good resume. Both teams have a conference championship under their belt, or similar resumes at least. Both teams have a conference championship under their belt, and you can't really decipher between the two teams. So then you just go, just look better. I mean, to stack Ohio State against Baylor and TCU in 2014, yeah, they had similar resumes, but if you watch Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, they had similar resumes. Technically, they were both conference championships, even though I give the nod to Baylor because Baylor won in Waco in the shootout. And this is the last thing I'm going to say, then I'm going to get off because I've been on for a half hour, which is crazy. Thank you, by the way.
Okay, Bash, and then I'm going to try to weed through all that, but finish up.
Okay. But Ohio State, at the end of the day, and I think everyone could say this, they just look better. They look dominant on defense against Wisconsin, dominant offensively with Cardale Jones at the helm. At the end of the day, they got their decision right, not based on anything, but it just looked better, and that was a tiebreaker. That's what I like about the playoff, but I think there needs to be clarity, and I hope it happens. Thank you, Mark, for all your time tonight. I'll talk to you another time.
All right, Bash, have a good one. All right, Bash Gaming. There was a lot there. I will only say this, that we have an issue with 4 spots in 5 conferences, and not even including when there's 2 really good teams, as there were last year with Georgia and Alabama, to a lesser degree, Ohio State, Wisconsin in one conference, and then also the group of 5 not taken into consideration, Notre Dame not taken into consideration, when they will at some point play themselves into a playoff argument, as they almost did in 2015 and May this year. So it's automatically an issue. Buckeye State Sports made a point that's exactly my point. I understand that if USC won the Pac-12 championship game as they did last year, they would, in my format, earn a playoff spot as the Pac-12 champion. But they were blown out by Notre Dame by 35 points. Okay, yes, that game would have been meaningless in that situation. However, if they would not have won the Pac-12 championship game, for all the non-conference champions, those games are critical. Ohio State, Oklahoma, critical to those schools that don't win the conference championships, because they're trying to earn one of 2 or 3 spots that are left open as the wild cards. I don't think we can ever arrive at a place of clarity with the selection of this, because we are cramming 5 conferences plus the group of 5 plus Notre Dame into 4 spots. So there's always going to be a gray area of what's the best resume look like. And that's why you keep hearing conference championship, 13th data point, best wins, most dominant performance, worst losses, 2 losses versus 1 loss. How good's the comp? We keep hearing all this different criteria, and it gets mixed around. And one year this means a whole lot, and that just means a little bit. And the next year they change it to, because you're trying to make something fit that doesn't fit. All right. In the NFL, if you win a division, you go to the playoffs. And Bash Gaming's point was that the NFL, there's more parity, therefore everybody plays a similar schedule. That's why I have a proposed schedule. If you guys have caught the video in the off season, and I'll recut it this off season, that would take the scheduling out of the hands of the colleges. Then they can no longer serve their own agendas. This playoff selection committee or the scheduling committee, the Mark Rogers TV Voice of College Football Selection Committee, scheduling committee, would take on the scheduling. And it would be very, very unbiased. What it would do would be, Bash Gaming's first point was a very good point, that all the conferences need to play the same number of conference games, either 8 or 9, let's say 9 games. Everybody plays 9 games. Therefore, you've got 3 left. We're going to give all the schools 1 game. You can go schedule 1 game, and most likely you're going to go schedule an FCS because you won't want to add to the schedule we're giving you in the other 2 non-conference games. So the 2 non-conference games we're giving you are going to be a composite of 2 teams that last year played to a 500 conference record. So everyone in the nation is going to be playing an equally balanced schedule against a composite 2 teams out of conference who went 500 last year. So for example, everyone's playing 9 games in the conference, and let's say you are North Carolina State. We are going to set you up against Michigan, who went 5-4 in the Big Ten last year, and West Virginia, who went 4-5 in the Big 12. And those are the 2 teams that you're going to play. They went 9-9 total in their respective leagues, and everyone will play 2 teams that went 9-9, and it can be mathematically worked out. It's not difficult to do. I've done it. So at least there's an appearance of equality. No, we can't predict or perfectly project how much better a team's going to be the next year or worse a team's going to be. We can only schedule fairly based on the previous year's results, and that would do it. And we would also balance out the conference schedules because they're loaded with inequity and unfairness too. And I've outlined that in the past. And if you haven't caught those videos, either go look them up or wait till the off season, because I'm going to go over this again. But even the conference schedules, for example, Utah and Arizona both play in the Pac-12 South. They are competing for a division title, which of course, the way Arizona's playing, it doesn't look like they're going to be. But by all argument's sake, they are competing for a Pac-12 South division, Utah and Arizona. Okay, tell me if this is fair. They both play everyone the same in the South. So they play 4 of the 6 teams in the North. The 4 teams that Utah plays this year went 24-12 last year in conference. The 4 teams that Arizona plays went 12-24. That's how separate their 2 conference schedules are. Utah has to deal with both Stanford and Washington. Arizona doesn't have to play Stanford or Washington. How does that happen? It makes no sense. So the scheduling screwed up both conference and non-conference. And it can be fixed, and it's not even that difficult. Nebraska is playing the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. They have to play Ohio State, Michigan State out of the Big Ten Eastern Division. There are other teams in that division that don't have to sniff one of the biggies, that they play Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana, or may have to play one of the tough teams. Just doesn't make any sense. It can be fixed. It's not that difficult. All right, guys, I'm going to run down my picks. I don't know that there's anything that you guys see here. Ricky makes the point about the Seahawks that went 7-9, and then they upset Drew Brees and company, who was 13-3, that had to travel to Seattle. One of the oddest circumstances in NFL history. But it's not like there's a committee in the NFL that's saying, you know what? Yeah, the AFC West isn't really that good this year, so their winner went 9-7. Leave them out. And the scheduling's such out of conference that I'll take an example, and I could give you a zillion of them, but I'll give you one example, just one example. Wisconsin in 2011 went 10-2. They went 6-2 in the Big Ten. So they went 4-0 outside the conference. They lost on 2 Hail Marys in the Big Ten. 2 Hail Marys to Ohio State and Michigan State, but they still went 6-2 and won the Big Ten championship, won the conference championship game. So therefore, they obviously weren't anywhere close to going to a BCS championship game and were not considered. No one outside the Big Ten proved that they could beat Wisconsin during the regular season, but they were relegated to not playing for a national title, and the Big Ten was not represented. Even though the best team in the Big Ten didn't lose to anybody outside the conference. All right. So here's the picks. Mark Rogers used to hang out with the Dog Pound in Cleveland back in '85 when Bernie Kosar changed the state of Ohio to Whiners. Dennis, for some reason, has really latched on to this Browns theme with me. You want to know my professional football fandom history? This is what it is. I became an NFL fan when I was about 10, and I loved, cannot emphasize how much, except to say maybe the worst loss ever for me as a fan, and there have been many, was the catch. Dallas losing to San Francisco in the NFC Championship game, January 1982. I was devastated, and even devastated to this day in many respects. I loved the Cowboys. Okay? Dennis, you listening? So you would think that I would have been in my glory when Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin, the trio, the triplets, and the rest of the team came together and they won Super Bowls. Nope. When they fired Tom Landry, the day they fired Tom Landry, I was done with the Dallas Cowboys. My son's name, my son is 21 years old. His name is, you guessed it, Landry. I was a Cowboys fan to the hilt. I was done with the Cowboys immediately. They won Super Bowls. I didn't care. I was an NFL fan for the next 10 or 12 years and watched the NFL, loved the NFL, but I had no dog in the fight. Didn't care. Just watched the games for the fun of it, just because I love watching football. And then when the Browns came back in 1999, I thought, okay, I'm a Buckeyes fan. I'm an Indians fan. I love those two teams. I'm not a big NBA guy, but I'm technically a Cavs fan. So I should root for the Browns. I should be a Browns fan. So I kind of, you know how your heart takes you in a direction as a sports fan? You love the teams you love because something, either because you grew up there and your heart took you in that direction, right? And for those of you who fell in love with teams in other areas of the country, you just fell in love with those teams for some reason. Something attached you to that team. Well, I made a business decision. Well, it wasn't a very good business decision, as we can see. But basically, I'm an Ohio guy. I'm going to root for the Cleveland Browns. My heart wasn't in it, but I decided in 1999 when they came back, and as a Ohio guy who grew up 45 minutes south of Cleveland, I was hurt by the move to Baltimore and all of that. Even though I wasn't a Browns fan, but I was hurt by the city of Cleveland not having an NFL team. And I thought the NFL did the city right by, in an unprecedented fashion, saying, unlike the Rams moving from LA to St. Louis, or the Colts moving from Baltimore to Indianapolis, or many other moves in which we just let them go and that's it, you are going to, Baltimore Ravens, have to start your own team, your own franchise with your own colors, your own history, your own name. And we are keeping the name Browns in Cleveland and going to reestablish the franchise. That's completely unprecedented in professional sports. So I decided I'm a Browns fan and I'm going to be a Browns fan. Now, have the Browns had my heart for the last 19 years? No. they have my heart about as much right now as they ever have, because I'm getting not excited, but I see some hope. I see a glimmer of hope. There was a season they had, it must have been about 2010 or 11, with Eric Mangini as head coach, and they beat the Patriots, they beat the Saints, or maybe they just took the Saints to overtime. But they had a good run about mid-season, and they got to like 6-6, and it looked like they were turning a corner. Then they slid off the rails, finished 6-10, and Mangini got fired. I didn't think he should have gotten fired, and that was about the most investment I had in the team, was right then. But it's probably peaking again. But again, I made a decision. It was a conscious decision to be a Browns fan, but they didn't really have my heart. And they still don't really, they don't have my heart like the Indians have my heart. Bash Gaming. I appreciate the comment about me not showing that I'm a Buckeyes fan. I thought it was hilarious when I started this channel, and I used to rail on the Buckeyes and how they played weak schedules at times. I was all over them for that at one point during particular seasons. I don't remember when, but there were certain things that happened. I ranked them at times lower than the AP or the coaches poll, and I actually had dozens of Buckeyes fans telling me that I was an Ohio State hater, and I used to just chuckle in my mind, because I was thinking, I'm a huge Buckeyes fan. I was going to say the biggest Buckeyes fan on the planet, but no, there are some crazies out there, and I've kind of graduated from that a long time ago. But I've tried to be neutral, cut it straight. Yes, I campaigned for Ohio State to make the playoff last year, but I did it on the same principles that I argued the year before in 2016, that Penn State should have been selected. Conference champion. We need to leave one out, but I believe that they're the better selection over USC based on track record, quality wins. Therefore, Ohio State should go, just like the year before. Penn State, despite the 2 losses to Ohio State's 1, they won the head-to-head. They won the conference. They beat a quality Wisconsin team in the conference championship game. Even though I think Ohio State had a better argument in 2016 than Alabama did in 2017. They won on the road at Oklahoma. They beat Wisconsin. They beat Michigan. They beat Michigan State. They had a quality resume, and they only lost 1 game, while Penn State lost 2. But I still said Penn State should have gone to the playoff. All right. It's quite a disguise, Ricky, don't you think? From that slim down. And I think that's the only difference, right? The hair's about the same. Mark May. Yes, it's almost Saturday. Okay, here are the predictions. Here we go. You guys have probably had a lot of great comments that I missed. All right. These have to get better. And if anyone caught me, again, for the last 3 or 4 years, I used to do confidence picks, and I really need to study these a little bit more so I could do some confidence picks, because those were working out for me pretty well. I was at about 65 to 67% against the spread confidence picks. I would select about 2 to 4 games per week as confidence picks. So maybe we'll do that. Do I have any confidence picks in here? I'm looking at one for sure. I'm looking at one. Okay, here we go. I'll think about it as I read them off. So there's one game that doesn't have a line that I could find, but just for the record's sake, against the straight up selections, UC Davis at Stanford, Cardinal not sweating, they win the game. Okay, let's get to all the games with the point spreads. Oh, wow. Forgot Penn State. Let me write them in. Okay. Georgia State at Clemson. Mucky field. We know the weather conditions. We know the situation in the Carolinas. Regardless, Clemson wins, and they cover 33 points. Middle Tennessee at Georgia. Georgia wins. They cover 33 points. Albeit, let me remind you of the three things that I hate about these huge point spread games. I should probably just knock them off my record. That would help considerably. I shouldn't pick a game with a point spread over 3 touchdowns, because you don't know who's going to be in the game in the fourth quarter. You don't know how hard they're going to be playing, and you don't know what the coach's decisions are going to be concerning play calling, to either put the foot on the throttle and mash it down and drive it through the wall, or lay off and give up a couple late touchdowns and not score and run the ball and allow a backdoor cover. Regardless, Clemson -33, Georgia -33. Oklahoma at Iowa State, one of the more famous games of 2017, with the Cyclones announcing that they were a decent team going to Norman and upsetting Baker Mayfield. Kyle Kempt made his debut in that one en route to a nice season. Oklahoma wins the game, but I love Iowa State plus the 18.5 points. Kent State at Penn State. Penn State wins. They cover 35. Miami at Toledo. Okay. It is really difficult for me to pull the plug on a Miami loss here, but I do think Toledo keeps it close enough. They played really well for 3 quarters last year. Miami covered late, 52-30. Miami wins in Toledo. Tough game, noon kickoff. Rockets cover the 10.5 points. Give me the points. Florida State at Syracuse. When is Florida State going to wake up? Do they have the button to push, the flip to switch, the switch to flip? It's getting late. Florida State at Syracuse. I like Florida State to win the game. Really, really close. I will take Syracuse in the points, which I've got marked down as 3 points. I was hoping to get a little bit more than that, but Syracuse plus 3. Okay, Vanderbilt at Notre Dame. I love the Commodores plus the points here. 13.5. Notre Dame will survive and win. BYU at Wisconsin. The Cougars, if nobody's noticed, are much improved over the deplorable outfit that we watched last year lose 9 games. They lost by 5 at Cal. They beat Arizona on the road. They've got to go on the road again to Wisconsin. And yes, the Badgers could mash them. It's certainly feasible, but I like BYU to keep it close enough at 22.5. Take the Badgers to win the game. All right, first big one. LSU at Auburn. So I made the statement at the beginning of the live stream, if anybody caught this, that during the first 2 weeks of the season, looking at top 25 games and a few relevant games outside the top 25, there were 19 games each week, or 38 total, and there were 10 outright upsets out of 38 games. LSU pulled off one of those games, obviously, in winning as a 3.5-point dog against Miami. Auburn at home wins. I love LSU in the 10.5 points. Boise, Oklahoma State. Bash Gaming said it. I agree. Boise State's a better football team, and they're getting 2 points on the road at Oklahoma State. So this is the first of a few slight upsets I'm going to pick here, with Boise State winning at Oklahoma State. Give me the 2 points as well. Okay, SMU at Michigan. Give me the points with the Mustangs in 36. Again, this is a guess. When it comes to 35 to 40 points, 36 points. Think about that. Michigan beat Western Michigan, I think it was last week, 49-3. You know, this game could be 42-10 late, and then Michigan pops in a late touchdown and covers, or they don't, and they win 42-10 and they don't cover. I hate the games that have such a large point spread that you lose the narrative of the game. Like if LSU loses by a field goal, then I will think, okay, I nailed this game. I predicted Auburn to win, and I took LSU in the points because I thought it was going to be razor close, and it was. But you get a point spread up in the 35 range, and yeah, I knew Michigan was going to kill them. By how much were they going to kill them? I don't know, by 32 or 38, not 35. I don't know. Again, I should contemplate dropping these large spread games because they're just a nightmare to try to select. SMU plus the 36 at Michigan. Of course, the Wolverines win the game. I'm throwing in, even though it's outside the top 25, the Houston Texas Tech game. Probably not a good decision based on my record, but I'm going to throw it in anyway. I like Texas Tech with a slight upset at home plus the 1.5 points. San Jose State at Oregon. Here's another classic example. I'll take San Jose State. Take those Spartans and 42 points against Oregon. Okay, Bama at Ole Miss. I love Bama covering 21.5 points at Ole Miss. Louisiana at Mississippi State. Lay the 33. Bulldogs covered the 33 against Louisiana. Missouri at Purdue. And one thing I should have mentioned before I did this was, so I was not swayed by the lines. This is what I typically do. I look at the schedule. I don't look at the lines. And I write down a score or a point differential. And then I look at the line. And of course, I predicted Missouri would beat Purdue by 6. And then I looked at the line and it's 6. That happened a few other times too. Yeah. Can't pick out the games, but there were about 5 games where I picked it right on the line. All right, Missouri at Purdue. So since the Boilers are at home and coming off a dismal effort against Eastern Michigan, I'm going to take Purdue reluctantly with the 6 points against Mizzou, but the Tigers do win the game and make amends for a 35-3 blowout at the hands of Purdue last year at home. All right. One of the big ones here, Ohio State at TCU. I mentioned it earlier when I was on the line with Bash Gaming. Buckeyes win 38-28, which means that Ohio State, of course, wins the game, but TCU covers 13. USC at Texas. I have said the entire offseason that USC was going to have a season in which they were competing for the Pac-12 championship near the end of the season after getting off to a rough start. Well, that rough start started with a 2-touchdown loss at Stanford. Now they've got to turn around and go to Texas. But Texas is not playing well. This game's going to be in the low 20s, and just because of home field advantage, I'm taking Texas in a night game over USC, but I will take those 3.5 points out of USC because I just think it's going to be low scoring. Points are going to be at a premium, and I'll take USC plus 3.5 at Texas, but the Longhorns do win the game. Washington at Utah. I think Washington is a really, really good team. I think that they ran up against it against Auburn. I thought that either one of those teams could have won the game. They were that good. So I believe Washington is a better team than Utah. But let's understand, if we look at the entirety of a college football season, the best team doesn't always win. There's about 3 to 4 games a week where the best team does not win. This is one of them. Utah wins at home. I was hoping that this spread was going to be in the 8 range to get me over a touchdown cushion, but it's not. I'll take Utah to win outright, plus the 5.5 points as well. Arizona State coming off that monumental win against Michigan State, a game that we picked Arizona State to cover. They, of course, did, and won outright against Sparty. They go to San Diego State. They lost to the Aztecs. This San Diego State team looked really good for almost 3 full quarters against Stanford. They're at home. They had to play that Stanford game on the road. I like Arizona State with a little bit of a letdown here, so take the Aztecs. Take them here, plus the 6, and they're going to win the game outright. And then finally, I'm just tacking this on because I think it's an easy win, and maybe it's a trap game. South Florida at Illinois. The Illini are terrible. South Florida defeated Georgia Tech last week by 11 points. South Florida is going to go to Illinois. I know it's on the road. I know it's an early kick, the whole deal. But South Florida is going to go up there and take care of business. They're going to cover the 11 points against an awful Illinois team. There you have it. Those are picks for week 3, trying to improve on 41-8 and 18-20 against the spread. But never fear, I'm usually in this position 2 weeks into the season, maybe even into 4 weeks into the season. But again, 58% against the spread last year. All right, you guys, it's been good. If you want to hear about what exciting things I have to do right now, it's 1:00 in the morning. I mopped my floor, my kitchen floor. I put in a new floor, and now I'm going to seal it. So, and then maybe a little late night channel surfing. And then we got to get up bright and early to deliver college football to you, the masses. And for Bren and Dennis and NCIS Fanatic and Bash Gaming and Ricky and 288028, and I could never mention enough of you, Buckeye State Sports, all of you guys. I appreciate your support. And yeah, we'll get there. We will get there. I'm going to make some changes in regards to how I approach the content. I don't necessarily think, for as much as I love the conversations that I have with many of the people that come on, there are certain reasons in which those are going to be lessened, and you're going to have to listen to me more. All right, guys. Thanks so much for the support. Jump on the newsletter, The Voice of College Football. Just send your email address to MarkRogersTV, MarkRogersTV at Gmail. We'll get you that newsletter each and every Monday. If you want the 2 backlogged newsletters from week 1 and week 2, I'll get those to you as well. Like, comment, subscribe, tell your family and friends that we're here, and we will see you bright and early tomorrow morning for college football. Can't wait. See you then.